Shadow was more than just a radio voice or pulp magazine hero. He had become an American institution. The pulp magazine had a monthly circulation of 750,000 and was printed in 7 different languages. The radio program was heard on over 300 stations across the USA and also in foreign nations around the world.
Quem sabe o mal que se esconde nos corações humanos? O Sombra sabe.
The Shadow Club had well over 1 million members, but that was only counting official members. The truth was that back then, everyone belonged to the Shadow Club, and the Shadow Club was just the beginning. There were shadow coloring books, shadow matchbooks, shadow big little books, and shadow comic books, shadow blotters, belts, busts, and bagatelle games, shadow cycles, rings, and records. Getting in the holiday spirit, shadow masks and board games make it, heaven help us, a shadow Christmas. The Shadow Club also had another important member, Hollywood. Movie stars such as Gary Cooper had appeared in ads in the Shadow Pulp magazine. Now, several would portray the Master of Darkness himself on the silver screen. In the early 1930s, Universal produced a series of shorts featuring the Shadow in the role of narrator. At least one of these 6 short films featured an unseen Frank Reddick as the voice of the Shadow.
Watch for me, you shall see me soon again.
In 1937, Grand National Pictures released The Shadow Strikes, based on Gibson's Ghost of the Manor. In this 64-minute detective thriller starring Rod LaRoque, Lamont Cranston is called to the home of a friend to expose a murderer.
Shadow.
In the 1938 sequel, International Crime, Cranston is a newspaper columnist who foils a global criminal syndicate.
The Shadow Speaks, bringing to you the latest news in the world of crime, prevention, and detection.
A Shadow movie serial premiered in 1940, directed by James W. Horn, with Vita Ann Borg as Margot Lane and Alaskan-born Victor Jory as the Shadow.
This is the Shadow. Stand away from that prisoner.
A radio episode and 2 pulp tales were combined to create the story for this 15-chapter movie serial from Columbia, where the Shadow battles not the lone tiger, but the black tiger. Yet another supercriminal who attempts to, what else? Conquer the world until he meets the Shadow. Then he's gone with the wind. Before being cast as the Shadow, Victor Jory had usually played villains, including a former slave overseer in Gone with the Wind who wants to buy Tara, Scarlett O'Hara's plantation, from her.
Come out here to offer to buy the place from you, to make your right good offer.
That's all of Tara you'll ever get.
You'll be sorry for that.
Scarlett better look out. By the way, did you know that TV Superman George Reeves also appears in the very beginning of Gone with the Wind?
I've got an idea. We'll talk about the barbecue the Wilsons are giving over 12 Oaks tomorrow.
The Man of Steel was a bit of a magician himself. Another superhero actor appears in Gone with the Wind. Do you know which one?
Are you ready to tell me?
Yeah. I'll not only tell you how, I'll show you how it's done. Shazam!
It's Tom Tyler, who once played Captain Marvel. Here he is in Gone with the Wind.
Come on, man, we've got to march.
As Captain Marvel, Tyler used the powers of Shazam to take the sting out of a pulp-inspired super criminal named the Scorpion, who could have come right out of the pages of The Shadow. Their battle, sponsored by Republic Pictures, lasted for 12 startling, amazing, never-to-be-forgotten episodes. And in the end,
justice will be done to him. He committed many crimes in his own country.
Curses! Foiled again.
next came The Shadow Returns. Behind the Mask.
Plus, won't turn off the lights.
I did, May. I like the dark.
And The Missing Lady, starring Kane Richmond. This unaired pilot, starring Tom Helmore, attempted to bring The Shadow to television in 1954.
The shadow.
Who are you? I am the Shadow. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Only the shadow knows.
1958's Invisible Avenger, also known as Bourbon Street Shadows, starred Richard Durr as the Shadow foiling a plot to overthrow a foreign government. In addition to the pulp magazine, Street and Smith also published a Shadow comic book that ran for 101 issues. The first 5 issues featured fully painted covers, all recycled from the pulps. The comic sometimes adapted episodes of the radio drama, including a popular show called Spider Boy, about a crazed weaver who was obsessed with spiders.
We present one of your favorite stories by popular demand, the weird and wild tale of Spider Boy.
The Shadow never had his own pet spider, but once he almost got his own version of Superboy's dog, Crypto, the famous super dog from Krypton. Vulcan, the Great Dane of Crime at Seven Oaks, had become popular among Shadow readers. John Nanovic, the man who edited the Shadow pulp magazine from 1931 all the way through 1943, wanted to add Vulcan the dog to the Shadow family permanently. But cover artist Graves Gladney refused to return to the gas station where the vicious-looking dog he had used as a model for Vulcan lived. So, thankfully, the Master of Darkness never got his own version of Ace the Bat Hound. Although he did inspire Sonic's nemesis, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Disney's Mallard of Darkness, Darkwing Duck. Plus this episode of Pinky and the Brain.
The jig is up, crazed madman, for I am the Mist.
Mist! Save me! Save me!
By altering the frequencies of my voice, I am able to befog men's minds.
But how?
With these, in a moment, you will no longer be able to see me, for I am the fog.
And so ends another episode of The Mist, brought to you by Blue Coal.
DC Comics decided to revive The Shadow in the 1970s. The book was originally to be done by Len Wein and Jim Steranko, but the deal fell through when Steranko demanded that his original artwork be returned to him, and then insisted on writing his own stories. Anticipating a problematic relationship with Steranko, DC decided instead to give the scripting job to Batman writer Denny O'Neil and assign the artistic chores to Alex Toth, until Toth had a Hollywood screenwriter punch up O'Neill's story and ask DC to pay for the rewrite. DC felt that it wasn't Toth's place to take it upon himself to rewrite the title's premier story without being asked, so they took him off the book. Next came Bernie Wrightson, with the script for the first DC Shadow issue completed. Teaser ads such as this one, drawn by Wrightson, began running. But then Wrightson had to leave the book to keep up with his work on Swamp Thing and other titles. DC wanted to replace him with Jim Aparo, but Aparo wasn't available at the time, so he too faded out of the picture. Newcomer Michael Kaluta had just begun working for DC with his Carson of Venus backup series in Weird Worlds. Kaluta was visiting the DC office in Manhattan when he asked for and got the job. Surprisingly, Kaluta knew nothing about the Shadow. Returning to the source material, he decided Ed Cartier had best captured the essence of the character. Employing Cartier's work as a starting point, Kaluta placed the Shadow in a world saturated with period detail and alive with atmosphere. DC's first Shadow comic book featured an original story by O'Neill. Next came The Freak Show Murders, adapted from the 1944 pulp story of the same name by Walter Gibson, who had once traveled with a carnival. Shadow number 3, Kingdom of the Cobra, was adapted from a radio episode. Years after he first worked on the character, Mike Kaluta did a new 15-page Shadow story titled In the Toils of Wingfat for a hardcover collection entitled From the Private Files of the Shadow. Walter Gibson thought Batman was just a clowned-up version of the Shadow, and when the two nocturnal crime busters finally met each other, Batman actually admitted to the Shadow that he was one of his main inspirations. Ironically, Walter Gibson's last published work appeared in this 1981 issue of Detective Comics. DC did several other series starring the Shadow, including a memorable run by Gerard Jones and Ed Barretto on The Shadow Strikes, which revolved largely around the Shadow's mysterious past and his ongoing war with Shiwan Khan. The Shadow had previously met the Rocket Man movie serial-inspired Rocketeer while posing as Lamont Cranston, although Rocketeer creator Dave Stevens couldn't identify the Master of Darkness by name for legal reasons. In The Shadow Strikes, the Shadow finally met his pulp brother, Street and Smith's other superstar, the one and only Doc Savage. The colorist for The Shadow Strikes was Shadow Uber-fan Anthony Tollin. Tollin and his friend Walter Gibson co-authored The Shadow Scrapbook. And Tollin is currently publishing a monthly series of trade paperbacks reprinting classic Shadow and Doc Savage pulp stories. Marvel Comics took a ride on the Shadow comic merry-go-round with a 1988 hardcover graphic novel written by Denny O'Neil, penciled by Kaluta, and inked by DC war comic veteran Russ Heath. Finally, Dark Horse Comics published several Shadow miniseries by Kaluta and Gary Gianni, as well as an adaptation of the 1994 Shadow movie. Don't miss our next thrilling chapter, The Shadow Movie.